Hi, it is me, Ginger, and I'm back with another book review. And today I wanted to talk to you about a book by an author called James Arthur Ray called The Business of Redemption. And if you're looking for a very quick, short, easy video review, I'm afraid this is not going to be it, because there's a little bit of backstory that I want to go into first. Okay, so the reason I chose to read this book, and I bought this book full price, I have no affiliation with James Arthur Ray whatsoever, is because I have been following James Arthur Ray for a number of years. If you're not familiar with who he is, back in around 2009 was when I first heard of him, when he was very big, very famous, Beverly Hills based, sort of Tony Robbins type. The reason I found out about James Arthur Ray is back in 2009 I was working for Sirius XM Radio, and I worked in their consumer electronics department. And one of the cool perks of that particular job was I got to test out all the equipment. And so I had this tiny little radio that I plugged into my big 1989 Lincoln Town Car, and they asked me to test out the Audible feature. And it's funny, it seems like a lifetime ago now. It's like a separate device that you plug into your thing. Why don't you just use your phone? But it was 2009, way back in the day. So yeah, I was testing out Audible, and at that point in time, I was really into the Law of Attraction. I just read a book called The Law of Attraction by Michael Lozier, and if you're interested in the Law of Attraction, that's a great place to start. So I was like, great, I can download as many books of Audible as I want. So I grabbed a few that I wanted to read, like William Shatner's biography, and then the rest I just scoured for all these Law of Attraction books, and I listened to a ton of them. Anyway, out of all the books that I listened to in my few weeks on Audible, the two that stood out to me were William Shatner's biography and a book called The Science of Success by James Arthur Ray. And he's the guy who wrote The Business of Redemption, the book I'm reviewing, and this is how I first heard about him. The reason I really enjoyed his book, and I enjoyed William Shatner's book, is because I used to listen to them on my commute to work. So there I was, sitting in my 1989 Lincoln Town Car with a velour seat. I loved that car. I used to call it the locomotive. It was just the best car I've ever owned. And I was driving down to work, 40 minutes there, 40 minutes back, every single day, listening to these audiobooks, and they were narrated by the author. And basically it was like having William Shatner in my passenger seat for an hour and a half every day. And when I went on to The Science of Success, it was like having the author, James Arthur Ray, sitting in the passenger seat for an hour and a half every single day. And James Arthur Ray has like this warm, laconic charm. He's got a great voice, and he actually makes you feel like your friend as you're listening to him. So I was like, I like this guy. And a lot of the stuff he said really resonated with me, so I became a huge fan. But it was very interesting because 2009 in James Arthur Ray's chronology is a pivotal year, because the same year that I discovered him, something terrible happened to him and his organisation and what he does. And I'm not going to go into the details of that. You can Google him or something like that. But what had happened is an accident had occurred and some people had died, and he was held responsible and went to jail. Whether or not you think he deserved that, in the same year that Casey Anthony didn't go to jail, that's up to you to decide. But this book, The Business of Redemption, it's about what happened afterwards, which is in many ways the most interesting part of James Arthur Ray's story, and also the reason why I chose to read this book. So, 2009, James Arthur Ray went to jail, and I had kind of moved on, was thinking of other things and stuff, but I'd followed so much of his stuff on like Facebook and things like that, that a few years later he popped back up out of jail. And you think, if you go to jail for a number of years because you were being held responsible for the deaths of people who were following your teachings, what would you do when you got out? And I know for me, I'd have probably got a job at Home Depot and tried never ever to go into the public limelight again. But James Arthur Ray continued where he stopped off, and he has spent the last few years trying to rebuild the business that he had of helping people. And obviously it's a very difficult thing for him to do, because he's got the events of what happened hanging over his head like the sword of Damocles. That's not really what was so interesting to me, though. The thing that was interesting is all of the content that James Arthur Ray was producing started to pop back up into like my Facebook feed and Instagram and stuff like that, and he was clearly a changed man. But more than that, the stuff he said was so much deeper and more authentic and resonated so much more with me. I was like, oh, he's back, but he's better than ever. Because my big complaint was like Tony Robbins and all of those other people is that it's like, life is great, huge smile on your face, everything's going to be peachy, you too can have your dreams. Whereas James Arthur Ray, after his experiences, was like, you know what, life is going to suck. And you have to kind of embrace the suck, as the Navy SEALs say, and find a way to find a purpose through it. And that's really what the book is about, purpose. Things are going to suck, things are going to be great. What keeps you going? You can't always pursue happiness because you can't be happy all the time. But you can pursue purpose because that's going to make you feel purposeful all the time. And it was something that really resonated with me, especially now because I'm really struggling with that. It's like, what is my purpose in life? How do I do what I'm supposed to do? And all these challenges came up. I'm getting ahead of myself. So let me talk about the book. The book's called The Business of Redemption. And it's basically about James Arthur Ray describing his experiences going to jail and how it changed him, and the reflection that went through and what he realized about life towards the end of it. To start off at the beginning, the book is really, really well written, and I say that as a writer. So I'm a good writer, and I also appreciate writing, and the quality of the writing in this book was phenomenal. Because it starts off with him being marched through the Arizona sun with his wrists and his ankles chained, about to go to jail. And the writing is really succinct. It's kind of got like the Hemingway, tip of the iceberg style to it, where you can feel the heat of the Arizona sun, and you can smell the body odor of the other prisoners, and you can feel like the butterflies churning in your stomach, and your hands trembling as you're totally out of your comfort zone. And he wrote that really, really well. So I appreciated the fact that it's a fantastically written book, and I had not expected it to be that well written. The book itself covered a lot of ground, and one of the other things that was really, really interesting and challenging was, here's James Arthur Ray, these events occurred to him. People died. He was held accountable. How do you react to that externally and internally? And within the first few lines of the first page, it was, I am responsible. And he took responsibility for that. Even though there were other sections where he sort of spoke about what happened, and you start to wonder how much blame you can place on him, and how much blame you can place on other people, and maybe how much blame you can just place on the fact that shitty things sometimes happen. And you're never really asked to decide that. You make that decision yourself. He just focuses on, I am accountable. I'm accountable not so much for the things that happen, but for how you react to them. And he goes into how he made a great many mistakes. And it was actually almost quite uncomfortable to read, because you've got a man who's based his entire life on helping other people, and then when the great narrative threw the once-in-a-lifetime challenge in his face, you can tell that he feels like he blinked. And I've got a feeling that's why redemption was the word that sort of that kept coming up. I know that this book has taken about 10 years to sort of finally materialise in our bookshelves, and I think that one of the original titles of it was called Redemption. It was like, can a man like that ever find public redemption? And in this era that we're in, I don't think he ever could, because we are not a society that appreciates redemption at the moment. We are a cancel culture. If somebody does a lifetime of good and then says something politically incorrect, their career can end. So I don't think that that is something he'll ever find, but the book makes it very clear that that's not something he's looking for either. Redemption doesn't mean redemption as in forgiveness. Redemption is like when you go to Chuck E. Cheese and you redeem your tokens for a gift. Redemption is a trade. You give something to receive something. It's like in legal terms, consideration is when you give something in consideration for receiving something. So what is it that he's talking about redeeming? And that is, you give your life and you receive your purpose in return. And it's about what you have to give up to get what it is that makes your life meaningful. And that really resonated with me so strongly. One of the lines from my favourite book, one of my most treasured possessions, is a 1930 copy of The Last Hero by Leslie Charteris, who wrote the Saint books, and this book eventually became The Saint Closes the Case. And one of the lines from it is, "Nothing is won without sacrifice," and I've clung to that my entire life, and this book is almost about that. That if you have a purpose in life, you're going to have to sacrifice a lot of things to grab it, but in some ways, if you don't, then life doesn't really have much meaning. I know, it was a very, very powerful book, and it was a book that helped me a lot, almost exactly with all the things that I was struggling with at that time. And the reason I bring that up is whenever I catch James Arthur Ray on Instagram or something like that, he posts these daily things called Triple Espressos, and I'll read through them, and he has this knack. I don't know whether it's just he's a brilliant writer who understands how other people think, or whether it's the great narrative, throwing it out there, but whenever he posts stuff, it always feels like it's kind of written just for me. And this book feels like that as well, and maybe one of his gifts is the fact that he writes like that and everyone who reads this stuff feels the same way. I don't know. It was a great book. It was a really great book. It made me think very, very deeply. I'm very pleased that I read it. I don't know. All I can say is that I definitely recommend it to anybody who has ever made mistakes in their life and is wondering where to go from there. I recommend it for anybody who's just floundering, who's like, what is the purpose of my life? Why am I here? Why am I so miserable all the time? Because it doesn't help you overcome pain, but it helps you overcome suffering, because pain is something that you experience, whereas suffering is something you choose. I don't know. There is a lot of depth to go in there. The final thing I'm going to say about the book is, I believe, in many ways, him writing it was as much therapy for him as it was a gift to the people who read it. And again, that's something that resonates with me, because every single one of my books that I write is like a therapy session. I mean, my last book was a 110,000 word story about the state of my marriage. And you do emerge from it a much better person once you manage to filter things. I always talk about the fact that I'm slightly crazy, so I'm kind of disassociated from life as I experience it, but when I write about it, I'm like, ooh, I get that. As they say about writers, you only taste things in retrospect. Anyway, I definitely recommend this book to anybody who wants to read it. And before you do, it might well be worth checking out James Arthur Ray, listening to some of his stuff, and seeing how he feels with you. Yeah, it's tough. It's a book that is almost the antithesis of the society we live in at the moment. The moment society is like, you have to be perfect, you have to be flawless, whereas this is a book is about, you're not perfect and you're not flawless, and shitty things will happen to you, and you'll make shitty decisions in response. But life goes on, and here is what helped me find a reason to go on. And that's an important book. And at the end of the day, that's what writing is all about. If you have a message, a thing that you want to communicate to somebody, even if that person is yourself, then you should write it as a book. And I think that not nearly enough people are going to read this book because of all of the different things that surround James Arthur Ray as a public figure, but the people who decide not to read this book because of that are going to miss out on something really special. Anyway, I hope you enjoy it. I'm sorry this has been a long, rambling book review, but I found it very rewarding, and hopefully it'll give you a thought to look at the book, and you'll find it rewarding too. Cheerio.